This is an amazing place here that you have. This is the fourth time, I believe, that I have spoken here. As you all know, or many of you know, I'm a psalmist, and I've written 3 books of psalms that are published, and I have a couple others that will be published. But I can't believe this happened, but I wrote first drafts of 9 psalms while I was in this space since 10 o'clock. It's like, what? We'll see how long it takes for them to be polished enough for me to feel good about them. When I was asked, you guys do something that nobody else does, and you probably know it, but you will ask, what is the title of your sermon like a month and a half before? It's like, what? How am I supposed to know what I'm going to speak? But it just so happened that I had decided that people have been asking me for maybe 35, 40 years if I write an autobiography, and I decided I'm not going to do it because if I don't believe in tell-alls, and I know too much about too many people. But what I'm going to do is more than a compromise. It's not a good word. Instead, as soon as I finish the series that I'm working on now, I write historical fiction too. I'm going to write a book on foundation stories. What are my foundation stories? That will allow me to only write celebratory things for the most part, but at least not tattletale, which is something my mother didn't like. Every time I've been here before, I've read from one of my books, but I'm not going to do that this time. What I'm going to do is to center us before I really give my talk. I'm going to read a psalm that I wrote last week. It's Psalm 525, obviously for the year 25. In our focus pauses, help us become the better self that you intended. We contemplate you not because you insist, but because speed living is not the surest way to discover the divine way home. I'm only going to share one of my own foundation stories. When I was applying to go to theology school many, many years ago, I wrote 2 or 3 times, and the theology school did not respond. And so finally I wrote, and I said, some of my more militant friends are wondering if the theology school is racist. Now, they did not know, and I am disclosing to you, that my more militant friends were the Holy Trinity. Me, myself, and I. A week later, I got an airmail special delivery letter, remember those? Saying, we're going to consider your application. The next day, I got an airmail special delivery letter saying, you have been accepted. I didn't know that I was going to be the first African American ever accepted in the school. But Martin Luther King Jr. had been killed around that time. And I think guilt set in, and they decided, okay, we began in 1806, maybe we ought to let somebody in who's of color. The Old Testament professor, and I was really thinking that if I had my way, I was going to be an Old Testament professor, talked about foundation stories, and I'm going to share some with you. When we look at Buddha and Muhammad, for me, their foundation stories is when they came in awareness of the Spirit. And I'll just leave it there. When I look at Jesus, for me, it was when he accepted being crucified after being in the Garden of Gethsemane and saying, if it is your will, take this cup away. But when he realized that he could not be himself if he was not willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, that is a foundation story for me. For me, when I look at Moses, the foundation story was when he decided he was going to marry a black woman, Zipporah. And what he opened up when he crossed that line was incredible. I want to share some foundation stories from my point of view. My sons may not look at these, but I do the same way. My son Kai is the oldest. I'm doing them in alphabetical order and not chronological order. We had a steadfast rule while I was rearing my 4 sons. Daddy takes a nap every day. If it was on a weekend, it would usually be early afternoon. If it wasn't, it would be when I got home from work. And that might be 5, it might be 6, but Daddy's going to take his nap. And Daddy does not want to hear any noise whatsoever while he is taking his nap. So one day I'm laying in the bed, and he opens the door, and he's got everybody else, his 3 brothers and his mother there, and he says, I just want to announce, I'm gay. And they looked at him and like, what? Nobody said anything, and they left. He turned around to leave. I said, wait a minute. Come back in here. And he said, did you hear what I said, Daddy? I said, boy, don't you ever wake me again when I'm taking my nap. And he said, but didn't you hear what I said? I said, yeah, I heard what you said. I knew you were gay before you even made the announcement. I'm your daddy. I should know it. That's a basic story for me. When I look at my son, Mai, he came from a family of scholars. He's the youngest one, and he's a basketball player, and he thinks that he's going to be a superstar, first in college and then in pro. And he's being recruited by University of Connecticut. If you know anything about basketball, they won the last 2 NCAA championships. And I said, man, you need to have a plan B. And one of his brothers told him the same thing. He didn't want to hear it. So one day we're driving down the highway, and I remember exactly where we were, and I never thought I would hear words like this come from one of my sons. He said, I said, how did you get a 2.7 average, man? I'm worth a 3.0 just walking into the room. And he said, Daddy, I know dudes that are dumber than me who are at Duke. That phrase still rankles me. I know dudes who are dumber than me who are at Duke. Well, he got sick. He got sick, and he had an injury, and he didn't get to play his senior year, and they'd won the national championship the year before. All those scholarships vanished. So he says to me when he's trying to make his way, we're on the telephone, and he says, Daddy, I'm about to give up on myself. And I said, you can give up on yourself, but I will never give up on you. He is a professor at Temple University now. He pulled himself together, became on the National Honor Society when he was in undergraduate school. He has his own business, and he drives a car that would never allow you to know that he is a Quaker believing in simplicity. Then I look at my son, Rai. He used to embarrass the I don't know what out of me because I was the dean of faculty and the dean of students at the school private school where he was going to school. And I believe he's the most brilliant child in the history of our family. And I would always read to the teachers in each class the grades midterm and at the end of the term. And he would be at the bottom, only 5 grades, the top 5 and the lower 5. He'd be in the lower 5 every daggum time. Now, And I know I have too much pride, but that really bothered me. But he'd bring his grades up. He brought them up enough that he went to Princeton. He'd bring his grades up later. Here's what turned him around. He went to visit his mother. We'd been divorced since he was a little boy. And he was with his cousin and with his girlfriend, a girl who he was dating. And his cousin was a girl who he was dating. And they're at a park. And I always told him, if somebody pulls a gun or a knife on you, give them whatever they ask. He's the oldest, and he did what his daddy had taught him. He probably only had $4 or $5. He pulled it out, he gave it to the guy. His girlfriend said, and his cousin did the same thing with whatever he had. His girlfriend said, no. Took 2 steps and the guy blew her head off. So he didn't tell me about it. And I had left the school to start a new educational program. And when I went in for parent-teacher conference days, all his teachers, who obviously knew me since I had been over all of them, said, you have to read Rye's paper. And finally, I got to his English teacher, and I read this paper. I took it home. She gave me a copy of it. I took it home. I'm sitting on the solarium, and it is funny as I don't know what. It's like Daddy has come up from the grave. It's so funny. And my father he could have been a comedian. So then it came to the end, and this girl gets killed. And I said, this feels too real. And I went upstairs to his bedroom, and I said, man, I just read your paper. Everybody told me I need to read it, but this sounds like real life. This transition is tough. And he broke down crying. And he said, Daddy, it did happen. I said, well, why didn't you tell me it happened? And he said, because I'm not as strong as you. I said, don't you ever, ever, ever compare yourself to me. You didn't grow up like I did. I grew up in the projects. I grew up with nobody in the family going all the way back to Adam and Eve who had graduated from high school. You grew up in the suburbs. I was desperate. Don't give me credit for being desperate. Be who you are. He got straight A's from then on. As I said, he went to Princeton. He has a doctor's degree. He has a law degree. Then I come to Ty. Because all foundation stories are not joyful. Ty's number 3 son. He asked me to come out for his graduation, and he was going to get married. Already, they had 1 child, and she's carrying the 2nd child when they got married. Back in the day, those things didn't happen. But we ain't back in the day. We are in the 21st century. So I'm out there with him for 4 or 5 days. We go to graduation, and then the wedding is a couple days later. I'm sitting in a circle, and there are maybe 200 or 300 people there. And when they exchange vows, I see he has dropped my name. His mother and I, when we got married, we did hyphenated names. I have worked so hard to make my name, Wilson, be one of, what shall I say, honor. My father's father had left him when my father was 3 years old, never sent back a dime, postcard, anything. Left my grandmother with 6 kids in the middle of the Depression. I call him Small Pop. I had no respect for anybody who does not stand up for his responsibilities and leaves a woman like that. And he said, when I traced him down, Daddy never seen him again. He said, well, your grandmother was a strong woman, and I figured she could handle it. It's like, what? That's your explanation. I don't know what happened between the 2 of them, but that had nothing to do with the children. My father was a ladies' man, and he would be, I knew 6 of his girlfriends' names, which means I know he had more than that. He'd disappear for weeks at a time. I'm trying to make Wilson an honorable name, and he drops it without even telling me he's going to do it. That's a foundation story about our relationship. I was so hurt and embarrassed, but I couldn't say anything because there's 200 people around here. And I said to myself when in prayer, am I going to let this break the relationship between my son and myself? I said, no. I will find a way to get through this. Now that happened 6-7 years ago. He still hasn't told me why I did it. But it did not change our relationship. He let me name his 2 girls, and then he let me name his 3rd girl. They know I love naming children, and that I wanted a girl every time. They have 4 hard-haired boys. So I ask you, what are your foundation stories? You don't have to answer now, but look back in your life and see which stories are so key that they have helped to make you who you are. Some of them will bring happiness, and some of them will bring some sorrow. But we are who we are, and we can be no more than that. To try to hide from ourselves is folly. I end with the psalm that I wrote this morning. Psalm 9:25. You gave me the ability to be a mountain rising from a saline sea, even when the avalanche threatens to deconstruct each flake of my hope. With patience, I begin one more time. Certain my shape will be different, yet knowing my core remains dedicated to kissing the sky as though for the first time. Amen.